Right, so it took Margaret Thatcher a decade of bruising battles to earn her poll tax moment. Keir Starmer's managed it in one afternoon. Yesterday, the Starmer regime turned London's Parliament Square into Britain's biggest ever terror suspect holding pen, though the only weapons in sight were cardboard placards and the odd thermos flask. With the sort of gusto normally reserved for royal weddings or football riots, the Metropolitan Police hauled away hundreds of pensioners, wheelchair users, veterans, and human rights campaigners under laws meant for bombers and death squads. The charge, of course, was expressing support for a protest group whose gravest offence is splattering red paint on arms factories supplying Israel. It was a masterclass in political self-immolation. A Prime Minister who campaigned on defending the right to protest, now criminalising it to the extent that he is. A Home Secretary applying terrorism power to criminalise dissent, even as the courts are conducting a judicial review on the ban's legality due to come in November. And a police force insisting it arrested everyone holding a placard while actually lacking the cell space to house as many as there were, and therefore seemingly telling us all porky pies. In the annals of state overreach, it was part farce, part authoritarian cosplay, and wholly revealing of a government more comfortable cuffing grannies than confronting genocide. Right, so yesterday the United Kingdom witnessed an extraordinary waste of state power. In the space of a single day, hundreds of people, perhaps as many as 500 according to some accounts, were arrested in the heart of London, not for violence, not for carrying weapons, but for holding placards. The Metropolitan Police swept through Parliament Square, detaining those who had gathered to oppose the prescription of Palestine Action, the direct action group whose protests have targeted arms companies supplying weapons components to Israel. By the Met's own official count, 466 people were detained under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act of 2000 for support for a proscribed organisation, with 8 more arrested for other alleged offences, bringing the total to 474. Other sources gave smaller but still huge totals, and this is largely because of varying times in the release of their reports as much as anything else. AP News, for instance, reported 365 arrests, Al Jazeera more than 200, while the Times reported numbers higher than the notorious poll tax riot mass arrests of 1990. Whatever figure you accept, though, the scale was unprecedented in the history of terrorism legislation in this country. We knew how this was going to go down, though, didn't we? And so did those taking part. The Labour government under Keir Starmer had prescribed Palestine Action several weeks ago now, on the recommendation of Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. The move was controversial from the get-go, of course. Palestine Action is a domestic protest group. Its tactics involve property damage, but not attacks on people. Historically, prescription under the Terrorism Act has been reserved for armed groups engaging in or promoting serious violence against people, the IRA, Al-Qaeda, Islamic State. Applying it to a domestic protest group with no record of killing anyone or injuring anyone is without precedent. The United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights described the move as a disturbing misuse of counter-terrorism legislation. Amnesty International called it entirely disproportionate to the point of absurdity, yet the government pressed ahead, even as Palestine Action co-founder Huda Amori won permission from the High Court to challenge the ban in a judicial review scheduled for November. So the lawfulness of the ban is unresolved still, therefore, yet the Home Office enforced it as though it were beyond question. The Terrorism Act of 2000 grants the Home Secretary wide discretion to prescribe an organisation if satisfied that it is concerned in terrorism. A definition so broad it includes serious damage to property where there is an intent to influence a government. Once prescribed, it becomes a criminal offence to express support for the group in any form, wearing its logo or carrying its banner or, as on the 9th of August, holding a placard with its name on it. The maximum sentence is 14 years. Critics have long warned that the law's breadth makes it ripe for political abuse, and here we go. The events of yesterday showed just how far that abuse can go. The policing of the protest was justified publicly in absolute terms, of course. Senior Met officers said in advance that anyone visibly showing support for Palestine Action would be arrested. After the protest, the force claimed it had arrested everyone holding a supportive placard. Yet this assertion collapsed under scrutiny. Freedom of Information disclosures, you see, show that the Met operates 602 permanent custody cells across 28 sites, plus 139 contingency spaces, giving a theoretical maximum of 741. Many of these will be occupied already during normal times, of course, with those arrested for ordinary offences. On a normal day, baseline occupancy apparently runs at between 50 and 85%, leaving perhaps some 230 to 440 spaces available at max. Processing terrorism-related arrests is far slower than ordinary offences. They involve lengthy interviews, biometrics, and all the counter-terror paperwork associated with that. Therefore, Defend Our Juries, a court support network who organised this protest, estimated that over 800 people were in the square holding supported placards. It is simply not possible, logistically, for the Met to have taken all of them into custody, therefore. The inescapable conclusion is that the police either arrested a smaller subset and presented it as total enforcement, or they used arrest loosely to include brief street-side detentions without full custody, but there's been no reports of that happening. In either case, though, either way, the public's been misled by them. Certainly Defend Our Juries think so, as they replied to the Met Police official tweet on this matter by saying, "This statement is untrue. We have plenty of footage showing that at 2 p.m, when the vigil was due to end, many hundreds of sign holders left Parliament Square, with hundreds remaining in place until arrest. The numbers are quite simple. You arrested 466 out of 800 plus sign holders. So come on, Met, fess up. You know you didn't have space for all of those placard holders, don't you?" Those targeted on the day included individuals whose very profiles undermined the state's narrative too. Among them was Moazzam Begg, former Guantanamo Bay detainee and now a director of Cage International, a group that has spent 2 decades challenging abuses in the war on terror. This very much qualifying for that, in my view. As Five Pillars UK reported, Begg has given evidence to parliamentary committees and is recognised internationally as a human rights advocate. Also arrested was Chris Romberg, a former British Army officer in 29 Commando Regiment, Royal Artillery, former UK military attaché to Egypt and Jordan, and the son of a Holocaust survivor. As other reports have observed, there were also elderly protesters, disabled activists, and this moment which perhaps encapsulated the overreach and stupidity of the police heavy-handedness and the stupidity of this policy more than any other. Even a blind man in a wheelchair was amongst those detained under this terror legislation. To present such people as that as a terrorist threat stretches the law beyond the point of credibility. How those officers can look themselves in the mirror and tell themselves they did a good job yesterday, I simply don't know. I saw that, I was shaking with absolute rage. I could not record this story yesterday. God only knows what I'd have ended up saying. But the sheer volume of arrests stands out in Britain's counter-terrorism history. Home Office reports on operation of police powers under the Terrorism Act of 2000 show that in the year to March 2023, there were 166 terrorism-related arrests across the UK. In 2022, 196. In 2021, 185. Even in years following major attacks, 2018, for example, with 441 arrests after the Manchester Arena and London Bridge atrocities, the total fell short of what happened in a single day in August of 2025. The previous modern record in 2017 was 412. This means the Starmer government detained more terror suspects in one day than any previous government has in an entire year since the Act came into force. Historically, only the 339 arrested during the poll tax riot and the roughly 400 on the busiest day of Extinction Rebellion's April 2019 actions come even close. And of course, neither of them involved terrorism charges, of course. So the scale is matched only by the mismatch between policing priorities and public safety. While Parliament Square was saturated with officers to kettle and detain peaceful demonstrators, London's violent and acquisitive crime rates continued to climb. Knife-enabled crime has risen nearly 60% in the last 3 years. Robbery of business property is up 50%, shoplifting up 20%, mobile phone thefts number over 81,000 annually, and theft from person offences have risen 15%. Clear-up rates for muggings are dismal, with only 1 in 20 robberies actually solved. The diversion of hundreds of officers to suppress political dissent under counter-terrorism powers while such crime proliferate is not only a moral misjudgment but a dereliction of duty to protect the public. The Met Police already has massive questions to answer regarding its ability to do its job, but to make that worse, simply to stage manage Starmer and Cooper's authoritarianism, is obscene. Politically, the arrests are a stark betrayal of Starmer's promises too. In his 2020 Labour leadership campaign, of course, those infamous 10 pledges, let's cast our mind back to those. Pledge 4, Starmer pledged to defend the right to peaceful protest and resist authoritarian overreach. Now, as Prime Minister, he has presided over the most extreme use of the Terrorism Act against a protest movement in the law's history, aligning with Yvette Cooper's decision to criminalise support for a group whose cause, ending UK complicity in Israel's actions in Gaza, commands significant public sympathy and support. The prescription has become emblematic of a wider assault on dissent by this government now, the state deploying its most draconian laws to shield a foreign policy position from domestic challenge. The underlying cause is the UK's role in Gaza. Palestine Action exists because companies on British soil manufacture and export components used in Israel's military operations. The group's tactics, rooftop occupations, blockades, damage to arms factory entrances have disrupted the flow of weapons and embarrassed the government's narrative of defensive cooperation with an ally. The International Court of Justice, alongside multiple human rights organisations, has described Israel's siege and bombardment of Gaza, of course, as plausibly amounting to genocide. Yet rather than address its own complicity, the UK government has chosen to criminalise the messenger instead. Historically, heavy-handed policing of dissent backfires. The poll tax riot helped crystallise public opposition to Margaret Thatcher finally, contributing to her downfall. This moment has the potential to become a similar inflection point for Keir Starmer. The imagery is potent. A blind man in a wheelchair, flanked by police, a decorated veteran in custody, a respected rights campaigner in handcuffs, rows of elderly people being led away for holding signs or even being bodily carried off and clearly in distress. Those images cut across political and cultural divides. They feed a narrative of a government that is out of touch, overreaching, and willing to smear ordinary citizens as terrorists for challenging its policies, its defence of Israel as this is. The constitutional implications are equally severe. Prescription is a ministerial power exercised with minimal oversight. Once a group is banned, even symbolic support becomes criminal. If this precedent stands, future governments can prescribe climate movements or trade union networks or anti-monarchy campaigners on the basis that their tactics involve serious damage to property aimed at influencing policy. Combined with the Public Order Act restrictions and the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act's curbs on demonstrations as well, the path towards outlawing protest movements wholesale is becoming alarmingly clear. This is why international comparisons matter. In most democracies, a domestic protest group would not be treated as a terrorist organisation unless it engaged in sustained lethal violence. In the United States, for example, even radical direct action groups are generally prosecuted under criminal damage or trespass laws, not designated as terrorist entities. In France and Germany, while police may disperse or arrest protesters for specific offences, blanket criminalisation of political support for a movement is rare and often struck down by their courts. The UK's approach risks placing it alongside states that use counter-terror frameworks to crush peaceful dissent, a trajectory more akin to authoritarian regimes than to peer democracies. It is democracy at stake here and now. Make no mistake about it. The role of lobbying and foreign influence also needs to have some scrutiny in this case. The Israeli government and aligned advocacy groups have long pressed the UK to curtail protests against its arms suppliers. Reports from outlets such as Middle East Eye and Declassified UK have documented years of private meetings in which Israeli officers and officials urged ministers to act against persistent demonstrations at Elbit Systems' British sites. The prescription of Palestine Action appears to be the culmination of that pressure now, a political decision shaped by foreign lobbyists. The media's role in shaping public perception of the arrest is another factor in this. Mainstream outlets like Reuters and The Guardian report the facts of the arrest, but often frame them within the government's language of terrorism offences, implicitly accepting the classification. By contrast, alternative media like Squawk Box foregrounded the human stories of those arrested and questioned the legitimacy of the law itself, justifiably given the ongoing court involvement into the legality of the prescription. Imagery played a key role in coverage, with photographs of elderly and disabled protesters in custody circulating widely on social media, fueling outrage far beyond the activist core. But equally, this was the norm of the events. This is not selectively choosing the right images. This was commonplace action. The effect on the movement itself remains to be seen. History offers examples of repression either stifling dissent or galvanising it. The suffragettes, the civil rights movement, anti-apartheid campaigners all faced mass arrests, yet those crackdowns often swelled their ranks and strengthened their moral claim. Palestine Action may find that the government's attempt to erase it from public space instead cements its place in the public consciousness. And should the judicial review render the prescription unlawful, as surely is the only sane conclusion, they may see their membership swell as a result. In the end, the 9th of August 2025 was not simply a large-scale policing operation, it was a political act, the use of the state's most draconian security powers to criminalise peaceful protest in defence of a foreign policy under growing moral and legal challenge. The numbers, the logistical impossibility of the Met's claims of arrest, the profiles of those arrested, the context of UK complicity in Gaza all point to an abuse of power that goes beyond one protest or one group. It is a precedent that threatens the right to dissent in Britain itself. Whether the public, the courts, the Parliament will accept such a precedent may determine the future of political freedom in the UK for years to come, but if it goes against the public, don't for one moment expect protest to stop. This government should be asking itself what the hell it hopes to achieve, in which case you can't arrest everyone as demonstrated here, but better they just pack their bags and go at this point, because there shouldn't be any political comeback for the likes of Starmer and Cooper after this one. This isn't even Starmer's only Palestine Action-related issue this week, as he's also tried to justify their prescription as being the result of their actions having been anti-Semitic by implying they targeted Jewish businesses. Elbit Systems are Israeli, so that'd be a conflation between Jewishness and Zionism again, would it, Keith? Get all the details of that mess of his own making in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.